Hello guys, and welcome to the Cycling Weekly Tour de France preview video for 2020. My name's Alex Ballinger, I'm news writer for the Cycling Weekly website, and alongside me is Simon Richardson, editor of the magazine. Hello Simon.
Alex.
So we are going to be looking at all of the headlines from the last few weeks since racing has restarted. We'll be looking at the key stages, we're looking at all the contenders, and we're also going to be looking at the unpredictable nature of this year's race given the global climate. So before we get started, let's jump into the headlines. So racing is back. Following an uncertain few months due to the global coronavirus pandemic, the peloton is back in action after the UCI suspended racing back in mid-March. The World Tour season officially restarted with Strade Bianche on August 1st, with Wout van Aert taking the victory in the men's race, while Annemiek van Vleuten extended her winning streak in the women's edition. Remco Evenepoel continues to dominate, winning the Vuelta a Burgos and the Tour of Poland to maintain his 100% stage race win rate in 2020. Grand Tour stars have been back in action in France, with Egan Bernal from Team Ineos taking victory in La Route d'Occitanie, while Jumbo-Visma's Primož Roglic was untouchable in the Tour de l'Ain, winning 2 stages and the overall ahead of Bernal. So looking ahead to this year's Tour de France, let's check out some key stats from the race. We will be covering 21 stages over 3,470 kilometres this year, which is around 100 kilometres further than the 2019 edition. The Grand Depart will be from Nice in the south of France, and the race will cover 8 mountain finishes, just 1 time trial which is 36 kilometres long, taking riders to the top of La Planche de Belfi on the final day of GC racing. The 107th edition will also feature 9 flat stages and 3 hilly stages. The race takes on mountains in the Alps, the Massif Central, the Pyrenees, the Jura, and the Vosges across the 3 weeks. Right then, without further ado, let's take a look at some of the key stages from the race. Simon, so what stands out to you about this first week then? Quite an exciting start we've got.
Yeah, I think the opening 2 stages in Nice, you have to look at those straight away because you're straight into the climbs. Stage 1, quite lumpy. Probably still going to be a bunch sprint, but might find out a couple of sprinters who haven't quite reached the form they need to. But stage 2 is quite a tough day with some big climbs, 2 category 1 climbs throughout the day, and you've got to be ready to go from the off because you could lose the tour on that day. And
also, this is where a lot of riders live as well, isn't it? There's a few riders that will train on these roads.
Oh, so much the peloton live around the Nice-Monaco area. They'll know the roads so well, and they'll know those climbs so well, not just from training but from other racing. So it's really just the action. I do wonder if there's a team or 2 out there thinking, let's throw an early ambush out to the favourites and see if they're up to it.
And then moving slightly further on into the first week, it doesn't get any easier for the riders, does it? So stage 4, we're looking at the first mountain finish. Sisteron to Ossier-Merlet, 157 kilometres. Yeah, first summit finish of the race. Takes them to a pretty high altitude as well. Should be an exciting one.
Yeah, I mean, starting down there in Nice, they did probably 10 or so years ago, they started down in Monaco. There really is no flat way out of that part of the country. If you want to take in the Alps or the Pyrenees and start down there, right in the southeast corner of France, you've got to go straight into the mountains. So starting down there means exactly that. So it's going to be a tough start. And there's lots of talk last year how they made such a tough route, and a lot of riders came out of the tour last year completely exhausted and didn't do much for the rest of the season. I think we could see the same again this year because it does look tough, and a tough route on top of a lack of racing in the legs. So I think we're going to see some big riders probably go pop quite early on, and that first mountain stage could be key.
Yeah, so it's a 7.1 kilometre long climb at 6% that we've got, maximum gradient of around 8%, so it's not the toughest finish in the world, but with 4 categorised climbs on the way, not an easy day at all.
Yeah, like you say, it's the climbs that precede the summit finish that really do the damage, and you often don't notice it, but it just puts fatigue in the legs. And by the time they get to that last climb, it's who's dealt with that. Okay, you'd think that early in the race it shouldn't be too major. You're not looking at it completely exploding. You're probably looking at just a couple of big names losing 30 seconds or so. I don't think we're going to see anyone lose the race there.
And then we move further into the race for sort of the next most exciting stage, I would say, looking at stage 13 from Châtel-Guyon to Puy-Mory, 191 kilometres, another summit finish. Just a long day of climb in this one, with even in between the categorised climbs, it's up and down pretty much all day.
Yeah, I mean, this is on the roads of the Massif Central, and these are tough roads. They're small, they can be quite twisty and narrow. It's not like you have when you're in the Alps and certain roads around the Pyrenees, that big, wide, straight roads mainly for the tourist traffic. And when the bunch on those roads, you can control the pace, you can sit at 50, 55k and control proceedings. It's what we see the big teams do. You can't really do that in the Massif Central because you don't have the space to get organised. If your riders are separated, it can take a long time for them to get together, get organised and get on the front and chase. So it really sets up the race for an ambush, as we've seen Movistar do in stage races over the years. They pick a day and they'll go for it early on, and you might force like a 50 rider break to get 10 minutes up the road, and you'll see people lose out. It's that sort of day when an ambush can happen because it's so hard to control it. The roads are dead, they're small, and it's just really hard going, the riding around there. Stunning, really beautiful place to go ride your bike, but really hard at the same time.
And then we really get into the sharp end where some of the more exciting stages are going to come as well. Stage 17 looks like a really exciting race. Heads into the Alps proper there. Summit finish at the Col de la Lue, 2,304 metres above sea level. Newly built road for the riders as well, which is always nice to see as well.
Yeah, looking forward to this one. This is one of the new climbs. A little bit like the Planche de Belfi, they found a road where they can extend it a little bit further on. I think they've basically, it's a ski station, and they have they've chosen to extend the road with probably a bit of a gravel track. So rather than get them on their gravel bikes, they've just tarmacked it. But it just takes them up higher and higher and higher. And at that altitude, that's where it's over 2,000 metres, it can really make a difference. Usually favours, the riders who live at and come from altitude, like the Colombians typically. So that will be a real sort out, and I think there'll be big time gaps there at that altitude and that far into the race as well.
And then it really is onto the climax of the race, depending on your opinion. I love time trials, so this personally for me is definitely the climax of the race. But uphill time trial, 36 kilometres to La Planche de Belfi, which we'll remember from last year, was an interesting little inclusion. It might not have caused the fireworks that we were expecting last year as a climb, but as a time trial up, it's something a bit different.
That's going to worry a lot of riders, I think, because you're doing that tired as well. Right at the end of the race, uphill time trials are not easy. And it sets up a nice dynamic between the pure time trialers and the climbers, and also the sort of the in-betweeners. So you've got your likes of Dumoulin, who you expect to do well because he can climb and he can time trial. But can he beat Nairo Quintana? A rider like Quintana who comes into his form towards the end of the race and is given an opportunity like that, that's going to be really exciting, and just see the differences in how riders approach it, what tech they use, obviously what bikes they go for will be fascinating, and the kit they put on those bikes and just how they approach it as well. I think that's a nice hill climb to finish the Tour de France on.
British fans will have something to look forward to then as they prepare for hill climb season. So it's an interesting choice for race organisers to put a penultimate day time trial as well, isn't it? So this will be the last day of GC racing before the finish in Paris. But it's always kind of a bit of a risk for the organisers, because you could have a really exciting day where the time gaps for the front three are really minimal and it could make the difference, couldn't you? But then also there can be the potential that if the race is pretty much settled by that point, there won't be many changes at the very front of the race as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of used to that. We're kind of used to seeing the Tour by the time it gets to its last 3 or 4 days, the three guys in the top 3 places are the strongest in the race, and they don't really change that much. But I think what'll change things this year is it goes back to the lack of racing. I think, again, Thomas said this way back in spring, that without the racing in your legs, without the preparation, without a full Dauphiné in your legs, because it's only 5 days this year, how a rider is going to fare in the final 4 or 5 days of the Tour. It's going to come down to the riders who have trained really well during the lockdown period, because they haven't had the chance to get the big races in their legs ahead of the Tour. So coming into that final week, I think there's going to be a lot of surprises. And what a stage like the time trial at Planche de Belfi will do is just sort of really concentrate that, because you can't ride a good time trial if you're tired and a good uphill time trial if you're tired. You're really going to get found out. So it does come down to the riders who've trained and prepared really, really well and been able to do that without the racing, the normal racing that they're used to.
Right then, let's jump into looking at the contenders for this year's Tour de France. Let's start off by looking at individual stages, and we'll talk about the sprinters a little bit. Interesting race, this one, because it doesn't necessarily seem too geared towards the sprinters for this edition of the Tour. But we've still got some big names racing anyway. Who are your picks, Simon, for the sprinters?
I think first and foremost, look at Sam Bennett at De Koning, seemingly continuously improving over the last year or two, if not longer. And I think this is his chance to grab a Tour de France stage win, all 3. Already had a couple of wins this year, pre and post lockdown, I think. Started at the Tour Down Under and then grabbed another one at Burgos. And he's quite versatile as well. You know, he's often up there in the sprints, have a little kick of hills right at the end. So he's quite a versatile sprinter, not like your out and out flat fast men like Cavendishes and your Kittel of old. And then Caleb Ewan, who was probably the best sprinter in the race last year.
Yeah, and Ewan's an interesting choice as well because he's always there, isn't he? You can assume that any stage race, he's probably going to take one stage. Last year took a couple at the Tour as well, so potentially a couple more in him this year as well. Peter Sagan then as well. We can't talk about sprint stages without talking about Peter Sagan, but it feels like we've seen slightly different version of Sagan over the last year or two, hasn't it? Really, so he seems more laid back towards, you know, his attitude to winning he doesn't seem as hungry as he has done, but he's still been delivering where he needs to, particularly at last year's Tour with a stage in the green jersey.
Yeah, I think Peter Sagan is no longer that young kid exploding out the pack as he did way back when he first started winning stages and, you know, riding away from Cancellara up a climb to a sprint win and then winning bunch sprints a few days later. Just he is Mr. Consistent in the sprints and he'll probably be in the top 5 every day. And he'll go off and get the intermediate points to get that green jersey again. But he doesn't seem to have that explosive power. And maybe with age, it just becomes you take fewer and fewer risks in those nervy bunch sprints. But you'd back him for the green jersey just because he knows how to do it and he's done it so often. But that's not necessarily by winning bunch sprints.
And then talking about who's taking that mantle from Sagan then as the young guy sort of breaking away from the pack, can't ignore Wout van Aert really. You could talk about him in just about any kind of stage apart from a pure mountain stage, couldn't you really? He can sprint, he can do classics days, and then he'll win a time trial as well. I mean, absolutely ridiculously good rider. He's definitely going to be one to watch this year at the Tour, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he is part of the next generation that's going to dominate for the next 5 or 6 years. I mean, last year he was this exciting rider coming out of cyclocross. Now he's just won Strade Bianchi and Milan San Remo in the course of a week. So, you know, breaking away on one and winning a sprint on the other against Alaphilippe. So yeah, huge talent. He's probably just got the edge of Mathieu van der Poel at the moment.
Let's talk about British hopes in the sprints then as well. We can't ignore him. He's the greatest sprinter of his generation. But Mark Cavendish, a lot of question marks around the Tour de France for him. You know, new team. He's back with Rod Ellingworth at Bahrain McLaren. What are your thoughts on Cavendish at the Tour then?
This is the great unknown really, whether or not he'll even go. I mean, he was told at the beginning of the year he would have to earn his place and he would have to do that through race results. And he hasn't got any. Not really through any fault of his own, we haven't had any racing, but I think to sit here and say, yeah, he'll be back in the sprints, he would have had to sort of come out all guns blazing out of lockdown and sort of be up there in the sprints, if not winning a few. We've barely seen him contend them so far. But the team had to know he could win stages in order to take him, and you can't really do that through his power data, his watts per kilo, his FTP, as you can a climber. You need to see him win races, and he hasn't done that. Because of the lack of results so far, I'd be surprised if he's on the start line. I think the team, they're showing really well actually. They have done since the start of the season. I think they've got new purpose, new focus behind them, and they are going for the Tour de France. That was, you know, Rod Ellingworth told us that last October, and I think they'll probably end up throwing their weight behind Landa for that.
Talking of the GC race then, let's look at the overall contenders. I mean, it's a who's who really. You know, the provisional start list is a who's who of potential Tour de France winners, isn't there? Obvious one to start with is Team Ineos. We're looking at definitely Egan Bernal, definitely Geraint Thomas as far as we understand it. I haven't seen much of Thomas this year actually. It's hard to know. I think he's quite confident in his own form, isn't he, this year? But we've seen a lot of Bernal and he is just as ridiculously good as he has been since he started racing at World Tour level.
It'd be hard not to pick him. As we discussed last year when Geraint Thomas was looking to retain his title, we haven't seen anyone successfully defend their first Tour win since Miguel Indurain, if you discount the Lance Armstrong years. Froome didn't do it. The likes of Jan Ullrich never did it, obviously. It's a really hard thing to do because of the attention you get off the bike during the winter. Now, the thing that plays into Bernal's hands is even if he did have that slightly distracted winter, he's coming to the Tour de France a lot later. Therefore, he's had time to get everything together. So even if he was on talk shows and everything in Colombia, because, you know, they love their cycling out there, he's had time to sort of get through that period, enjoy all that, you know, and get his head back down and focus on the riding. So I think he will start as favourite, and what we've seen of him at the Route Occitane and then the Tour de l'Ain, I would not be surprised to see him win it again. He's one of, as Wout van Aert, as Mathieu van der Poel, Bernal is the fourth of those riders that are just leading the charge from the next generation, and they're smashing it.
So the elephant in the room over at Ineos then is obviously going to be Chris Froome. There's so many questions about whether he will be included, whether he should be included for a multitude of reasons. But with Team Ineos, you'd imagine that the biggest thing won't be anything to do with him leaving the team at the end of the year. You can imagine that they would put that aside. It feels like the biggest thing is going to be, has he recovered enough from his injury at the Dauphiné last year?
Yeah, that along with what he wants to get from the race. So if he is saying to the team, I want to win, which we know he does, they will know whether or not he can, I think, from his ride data, because they will have it from every single day of his training. If they don't believe he can win the race, and he's telling them he wants to go there to win the race, I don't think they'll take him. And I would be surprised to see Chris Froome on the start line, in all honesty, because they've got 2 riders who can win the race. They don't necessarily need a third. What they need is their 9 strongest riders on the start line to work for a common purpose. So does Chris Froome fit into that mould?
So let's look at what is possibly going to be one of the most exciting aspects of this tour then. That's going to be the rivalry between Jumbo-Visma and Team Ineos as well. Jumbo-Visma are looking fantastic. For a few years now, they've been the team that have really decided to take on Team Ineos in the Grand Tours, haven't they? They've tried to up the professionalism within the team. They've really adopted the sort of marginal gains attitude, and they've just been signing big name riders as well. I think they've had their budget slightly inflated as well, so they can afford to bring on riders like Tom Dumoulin alongside Roglic and Steven Kruijswijk. But that sort of trident is looking like a really exciting prospect for this year's tour, isn't it?
Yeah, they took last year's tour by storm with the opening team time trial or early team time trial, and we spoke to them after that, and they said they'd really based all their training around time trial work for all their riders, and they'd really taken to it, and they had a common goal. Kruijswijk came third, Bennett was looking great, but because of his role he lost time on one day when there was a split because he was going back for bottles. That was a big story early on, but he could have been up there. Roglic obviously went on to win the Vuelta. They've now signed Tom Dumoulin. Those 4 riders are immensely strong and will really take it to Ineos, I think. The key is, what Ineos and Sky before them have done so well is have that team ethos of winning the Tour. It doesn't really matter who with, and they've won with 4 different riders. But that's not an easy thing to do, to manage all those egos, all those riders who want to win, but continue to get them to pull together for one common goal. That's a real trick, and that is done behind the scenes. You don't get to see how a team does that. So that will be key for Jumbo-Visma.
And who else have you got on your list of contenders then for the overall? It's an exciting start list, as you always get at the Tour. Slightly different with a delayed race and people's priorities changing due to lockdown, but we've still got a stacked lineup, haven't we, for the yellow jersey?
Yeah, Emmanuel Buchmann is a really exciting rider. I have to admit, I hadn't really heard of him before last year's Tour, but you look at his results and they're phenomenal last year. And beyond that, could we see a genuine challenge from Nairo Quintana? A fantastic start to the year this year. He seemed to be reborn at Arkea Samsic. Never worked for him at Movistar, having Valverde, Landa and the others all around him. It just didn't seem to suit him. Just never seemed to have his head quite in the right place, for the Tour, certainly. And when he had the chance to lead a team, he did better. But Arkea seems rejuvenated there, and they're obviously backing him. So it'd be great to see how he does.
So, of course, we can't overlook the Frenchman in the race as well. It's been a long time since we've had a French Tour de France winner. Are we going to get one this year?
Well, we saw a fantastic renaissance last year, didn't we, with Alaphilippe in yellow for so long, and Pinot really looking like he was about to make his move at the end before his injury. It just enlivens the race. What it does for people on the roadside is incredible, and the interest in the race around the country, and the newspapers on the TV, it's phenomenal. So we always hope to see the French challenging, and Pinot, despite his fragility, could still be the rider to do it for them. So often he gets to the end of a Grand Tour in great shape and then just something goes wrong. And it would be fantastic to see him podium, if not win it.
He became a bit of a fan favourite last year, I think, didn't he? I think he won a few hearts with even when he retired, I think he won more hearts then as well. Those images of him at the side of the road just absolutely devastated, because I think he knew that was a very, very good chance to win it for him. And then looking at sort of the next string of favourites as well. What about Richie Porte then? I know that he's there or thereabouts and he gets talked about every year before the Tour. Is he going to win it?
Richie Porte is probably the greatest one-week stage racer of his generation, but he's not a Grand Tour winner. His time has, I think, gone for his chance to win a Grand Tour. He's just never made it to the end of the Grand Tour. It sort of come on strong in the last week. He just can't hold it together for 3 weeks. Absolutely fantastic rider to have for your leader. Trek seem to make a habit of signing riders who have passed their best at Grand Tours. So how him and Nibali will fare we will wait to be seen. But I can't see him contending into the third week.
What about Mikel Landa as well then? You know, kind of, I would put him maybe in that category along with Richie Porte, where he's just been so talented for so long. Both came from that Team Sky system and looked like they were really going to contend for Grand Tour victories, but it's just never quite come together. Has Landa got a chance this year?
Yeah, I think he has. I mean, Landa's a slightly different beast, I think. He's immensely talented, can do crazy things on one day, but then the next... He seems to, rather than just fade in the last week, he'll just have one bad day at some point in a Grand Tour. He just seems to slip up just once in a Grand Tour, and it puts him out of contention. But we've seen the rides he's done, and he's got what it takes to win a Grand Tour.
So the other thing that we can't avoid talking about, of course, is coronavirus. We haven't really mentioned it much so far, but this tour already is completely unprecedented, and I think we're going to see even more changes as we get closer to the race and during the race. I mean, first things first, how is this really bizarre year going to affect the actual racing itself? What can we expect, do you think, Simon, from the riders and from the race, you know, from a racing point of view?
I think the unpredictability of it, a rider not having their normal build-up to a Grand Tour, I think will undoubtedly affect them as they go through the race. We've seen we know how important build-up races are for a Grand Tour, and how carefully riders pick their races, where they go, and dividing up the time between races and training and recovery, and that's all been thrown out the window. So you probably look at the best coaches to see who the best riders are going to be at this year's Tour, because it's probably an exercise in problem solving for a lot of them. How do you get them through first lockdown, then through a period of train when they can get out and train but no racing, and then get them through those early races and get the workloads that they need to be competitive in the last week of a Grand Tour. It's the good coaches are going to be worth their weight in gold this year, I think.
Yeah, and of course the virus can have a more direct impact on the race, as we've seen from some of the races that have restarted, where due to the added restrictions from the UCI and people being extra precautious, riders have just been pulled from races. We saw at the Vuelta at Burgos that UAE Team Emirates lost 3 riders due to they'd had contact with someone who had contracted coronavirus, and then Israel Startup Nation as well lost 2 riders. Alex Ballinger was there in Spain ready to race, had contact with someone who had contact with someone who had coronavirus. All turned out to be negative, but these kind of things are probably going to be fairly common this season, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are being incredibly cautious, and I think that's the right thing to do, because if they have an outbreak at a race, it puts the whole season in jeopardy.
Right then, let's get down to the serious business and let's talk about predictions for this year's Tour. So we put the question to you, our readers and viewers, on Twitter. So the question is, with the Tour de France just a few weeks away, we want to know who you think will win the 2020 edition. Now, so these are out of the bookies' favourites, top 4 bookies' favourites. We have Egan Bernal, Primož Roglic, Thibaut Pinot and Tom Dumoulin. That's slightly controversial for British fans, no doubt, that these are the top 4. But the results are in, and so out of 3,000 votes, we have Egan Bernal is the favourite from our Twitter poll with 44% of the vote, but not far behind is Primož Roglic with 41%. Sadly, Pinot and Dumoulin are outside of the rankings on this one. So, Simon, who do you think is going to win the 2020 Tour?
Well, I would be very safe and very boring and go with Bernal. I think if that's where the money's going with the bookies as well, I think that's probably the safe bet. So I will be a bit predictable and go with the Bernal win.
So I'm going to be slightly controversial on this one, and I'm going to go with Geraint Thomas. I think that he is. I mean, he definitely is capable of a repeat Grand Tour victory. I think things would need to go his way in terms of the way the race plays out, and how Bernal rides. Because I feel like if you were to put them both on the same climb, Bernal is probably going to be the stronger rider in that sense, but also it would win me more money with the bookies as well, so I feel like that's a good enough reason to choose him, isn't it? So that is my choice for the 2020 Tour de France. Right then, guys, that brings to an end our 2020 Tour de France preview episode. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, you can pick up a preview of the Tour de France in Cycling Weekly magazine as well. Simon, can you tell us more about that? Yeah,
August 27th edition is 124 pages, all the maps, all the riders, all the teams. It's the most up-to-date Tour de France guide you can get in the shops. Pick it up in WH Smith's or any good supermarket, and of course you can subscribe as well if you go to magazinesdirect.co.uk. It's all there, and we'll be covering the race throughout as well.
We'll be bringing you all the action and all the analysis on cyclingweekly.com as well, so make sure to check that out. Let us know who you think is going to win the 2020 Tour in the comments below, and we'll see you soon. Right then, guys, that wraps up our 2020 Tour de France preview video. Thank you very much to Simon for joining me. And Simon, you have your own. Doesn't make sense. We work together.
You've got your own altar.
You've got a magazine.
You've got something to plug.
You've got a magazine that you put together that I've not read, that I've not heard of.